This is the RDU on Stage podcast. I'm Lauren Van Hamert, your host, and on this episode, I'm chatting with playwright Deb Margolin. Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren Van Hamert, and this is the fourth in a series of podcast episodes exploring the 19th Amendment Project, a collection of plays commissioned by Burning Coal Theater and co-produced by the League of Women Voters and 12 other area theater companies. What would you do if you were met in a voting booth by a mysterious stranger from the past? That is the crux of Deb Margolin's short comedic play, Inalienable Rights. I didn't think I would ever meet someone as enchanted by language and words as I am, but I may have met my match in Margolin. And that is where our conversation begins.
I always felt that language was the clearest way to scream for help. I was interested in language from a very young age as this very flawed, very delicate, very beautiful way of moving between one's soul and another, one's experience and another person's experience. I was frustrated by language and enchanted by it. I read the dictionary rather than have any friends as a young. I had friends, but I read the dictionary as if it were a novel, which is akin to eating an onion as if it were a tomato. And I went to college. There were no women on the syllabus. I was an English major, and I just fell deeper and deeper in love with language. Henry Miller. I thought I was Henry Miller because when I graduated and I wanted to write from the body, I felt the connection between language and physicality. And so I just thought I was Henry Miller because he wrote very bodaciously and audaciously. What did you read? Virginia Woolf's, Mrs. Dalloway or something? Women were not really discussed. Of course, things are beautifully different now. I guess I discovered when I was about 27 that my love of language was most at home in the theater. And that was a process of revelation that came about when I was asked to sort of help out two women who would become my co-founders of Split Bridges Theater Company. They had hired a scriptwriter to help bring their improvisations into script form. And when that scriptwriter disappeared without giving them a script, they called me in because they knew I liked to write. I had been doing a little patter writing for Spider-Woman Theater, of which these two women were a part. And I wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote scenes, monologues, dialogues. I had been to see an improv of theirs, and it made no sense to me. They were just cackling and throwing pie dough. But somehow I dropped in there. I realized that my experiences could go into the mouths of people with whom I had nothing in common except for my humanity. And it was in my friend's bathroom where I ended up sitting down and writing many pieces to what became the play Split Britches that I realized, oh yeah, not only am I a writer, but my love of language is most at home in the theater, because theater is a mess. Theater is subtextual and metatextual, and there's margin for error that there isn't in a poem. In a poem, every word has to be right. Theater is a mess. And that's where I realized my love of language was most at home. I was about 27.
And I'm kind of curious. We have a women's theater festival here, and there are women's theater companies all over the country. How have you seen women's theater evolve since you co-founded Split Britches?
Split Britches stood on the shoulders of a lot of great matriarchs. To wit, Spider-Woman Theater, which was founded by three Native American sisters and was radically theatrical, hysterically funny, and magnificently diverse, and showed how women could make theater out of the interstitial moments of their own lives. Spider Woman Theater, Women's Experimental Theater Project, whose piece Electra Speaks from, I don't know, 45 years ago, 45 years ago, absolutely brilliant. It looked at the events in the House of Atreus from the women's perspective. And when I saw that, and when I saw Spider Woman, I realized that not only could I make theater, but that I would like to make theater. So just to acknowledge that we stood on the shoulders as there's another company, It's All Right to Be Woman Theater Company. We stood on some great shoulders. And then, that said, Peggy Shawn Lewis Weaver had begun this International Women's Festival. And once it was so successful in the late 70s, realized that there needed to be a place to continue that energy. And that's when the WOW Theater, the Women's One World Theater, came into being. And that theater exists today. It was a theater by and for women without a hierarchical organizational structure. And many people came out of WOW. Holly Hughes, the great Holly Hughes, the great and beautiful Lisa Crone, the Five Lesbian Brothers, Susan Laurie Parks, I believe, presented something there, Sarah Schulman. It was a women's theater. It was a women's space. And, we still are at work, both in art and in life, on achieving equity for women. I had Sandra Siegel of Women's Experimental Theater come and teach with me, work with me, and direct a production of Electra Speaks with my students at the university where I teach. And one of the students in that class, in addressing a question someone asked about, well, women are doctors now, women can be lawyers. What's the issue? And this beautiful woman, Hajra, said, these things are the artifice of equality. The artifice of equality is a beautiful phrase that has stayed with me because there's still so far to go in terms of women's equality, women's equity in terms of pay, in terms of the value of their speech. And that's where playwriting is so important to me, as is performance. I take the stage and I stand there. A lot of times I just like to stand there. I'm not, a young person, and I'm kind of funny looking. And it's the lights come up and a woman is standing there, and a woman is often judged. Is she sexy? Would I want to date her? Would I want to get her into bed? Are her boobs attractive? Nope. I just don't care. I just get on stage and I stand there. And that's the terms on which we're going to be together this evening. It's a radical feminist act for a woman to stand on stage at all, much less by herself on stage. In any case, I think we've come a long way. There's a lot of really, really excellent theater by women. Women have won Nobel Prizes. Former student of mine won the Pulitzer Prize. Jackie Sibley's Drury won the Pulitzer Prize for her play Fairview. We are starting to see women of color, start to make their voices heard. We're not there yet.
Well, and I kind of wonder in theater, since we're seeing such a rise up in the theater industry right now, do you think we're on the cusp of some sort of cultural shift?
I do. I think we're in the middle of a sociocultural revolution. And these are messy. They are messy. I've thought a lot about the women's movement in the 70s and the way in which it was messy and it was angry and it was inflexible. And women were said to have, quote unquote, no sense of humor. It's because the issues raised during a sociocultural revolution are not funny. It's not funny. It's not funny. Racism is not funny. Sexism, homophobia, xenophobia, they're not funny. A sociocultural revolution is somewhat brittle, it is inflexible, it is a mess, and when the people rise up, it works. And I do think we're in the middle of a revolution of that kind now. Given the Me Too movement, given the Black Lives Matter movement, I think we are at an important moment. I mean, certainly we have a socioeconomic collapse right now. We have a hideous and lethal pandemic, and we have a sociocultural revolution. And if that's not enough, we have a frying planet, but everything's good otherwise. Yes, I think we're working our way. We're working our way towards something. I feel very passionate that we need to get rid of the current quote unquote president if we are to continue. With that being said, I think we are working towards something more beautiful.
You know, I've done a few interviews with younger women artists, and they think they've invented the women's movement. Do you find that to be the case in your work and in your teaching? And why is it important to know our history?
We ignore the history at our peril, I really think. We have worked very hard to get certain rights, privileges that can be revoked at any time. And vigilance is the price we need to pay. And part of vigilance is a knowledge of history and a knowledge of how the struggle has evolved. I mean, I've taught students who say, oh, no, I'm not a feminist. I'm not a feminist. And I will simply say, do you respect yourself? Oh, yes. Well, then you're a feminist. It's very simple. When you're a member of a disenfranchised group, your self respect is given a special designation because it's not a given. When some white Christian man respects himself, there's no name for that because it's expected. We are feminists because we believe ourselves to be in every way equal to men and equal to anyone else. And in some ways, it is that simple. In other ways, it's much more complex. I think it's very important that, I meet a lot of young people who have no idea what shoulders they stand on. And I think it is so important because in that history are many lessons, and lessons that unlearned could really reel us backwards. It really doesn't take much to see the efforts to undo the strides women have made in terms of reproductive health. I mean, what's his name? I don't like saying the name of the president, but he has worked very hard to try to please his right evangelical or whoever they are by promising right-wing judges who do not respect women's sovereignty over their own bodies, women's right to equal pay. I was listening to a video of Phyllis Schlafly talking about how the Equal Rights Amendment was really bad idea because it would let men get out of supporting their wives while they took care of the children. It was really a scary paradigm she had in mind as the fixed way that we were supposed to be living. Anyway, I think it's of critical importance. And yes, I have noticed that we tend in our youth to forget the lessons of the past and think we invented feminism. And I mean, I'm glad for the energy. One of the things that's beautiful is the energy that young people are bringing to the fight that we have right now on so many different fronts. The energy is brilliant. I do think it's very important to know your history because there is peril in forgetting.
I agree. I agree. And I think that's why I love history plays and political theater so much because it gives us a gateway to look at these issues from a historic perspective. So I want to talk about inalienable rights. It's funny, it's really funny and a little bit sad because of everything we're experiencing now with voter suppression. From what I understand, the playwrights involved in this project were given very few parameters just to write a short play around the 19th Amendment commemorating the centennial anniversary. So, why did you take this comedic approach to this play?
My friend Madeline Olnick, who's a filmmaker and playwright, said, it is immoral to write a drama when a comedy will work. And I have to say, I think that's a good philosophy. One of the things that I've noticed about repressive, oppressive forces is that they always tell the people they're oppressing that it's actually an honor to be oppressed in this particular way. that they told slaves, oh, you don't need slaves from Africa who were owned by white people in this country. You don't need to learn to read. You're so elevated that reading is not necessary for you. In the Orthodox Jewish community, women are told that they're so sacred and so elevated that they don't need to pray with the men or have any of the honors that men are given in the course of worship. That there's always this kind of narrative where, oh, it seems like a right, but it's actually a burden that you don't need because you're so elevated. That it's this BS story that we're often told, and I wanted to reintroduce that idea. There was this idea that women were too delicate, that they were too hysterical, given that they had uteruses and periods and stuff, that they couldn't possibly make a rational choice, that was the province of men. It came from men and should return to men. These weighty decisions that women were much too delicate and frivolous to be able to engage with. And so that was an important idea to me to convey. And that was really sort of my impulse to write a comedy and my desire to bring to light this man who comes to tell the woman that what seems like a right is actually a burden.
One of the things I love about this collection of plays is that there really feels like there's such an urgency to this work. Do you feel like there's an immediacy when you write?
Yes. Yes. I mean, I really feel like everything's on the line. I really do. And uh, it's very much connected to the lack of leadership the lack of vision, the lack of grace. I feel like it's amazing how quickly, over the past nearly 4 years, things have deteriorated in this country. And I do feel that we are at a point of great urgency in in terms of everything, in terms of our survival as a planet, our survival, our ability to live together as men, as women, as transgender people, as queer people, as people of different, races. I think there's a fierce urgency right now, and I really feel we have to get this particular person out of office, and then we can harass the incoming people to do the right thing. We can hold them. We can make sure they do the right thing. They are not. I do not believe that the Democratic nominee and his running mate will attack women's right to choose. I do not believe they will continue the deregulation of environmental rules. That I think they'll rejoin the Paris Climate Agreement. I mean, we're at a point now. We're out of time. I have a sense of urgency about every day. As a person who has survived lymphoma 4 times, I live every day with a sense that it could be the last day I have. I'm doing great. I'm not, my health is great right now. My health is fine. But I have learned that I really don't have, I can idle, I can luxuriate, I can spend hours staring out the window. It's not like I can't rest, but I do not take a single moment of my life for granted. And in this country is in a state of illness, and I feel like there's a tremendous urgency. Uh, it was beautiful to commemorate the ratification of the 19th Amendment during the Democratic Convention. I was delighted with that correspondence, and I really do share a sense with so many other people of the urgency of the moment.
So you were a writer first, and then you entered the performing space. How does your writing inform how you approach performance and vice versa?
Because they sort of develop simultaneously. When I did some writing for Split Britches, realizing that we have collapsible boundaries and that your experiences belong to me and mine to you, that love is a form of invention. Once I had those incredible revelations about how writing for theater takes place, the next thing I knew, I was in the play Split Britches. So those two sort of passions grew up together. They were children together, and now they're mature adults together. Well, I don't know how mature they are, but they're adults anyway. Oftentimes, when I write something and I'm in it, if I write a play for myself to perform as a solo artist, or if I write a play and end up in it, People say, oh, you know how to do this, you wrote it. But that is not true. That is not true. Just because you write something doesn't mean you understand it. And just because you wrote something doesn't mean you know how to embody it. Embodiment is everything. That's what theater is. Theater is the word made flesh. A play is not just the text. A play is the language and the body in this gorgeous interaction in a live moment. So I have learned the joy of having a good director, somebody who sees more than I can see. I don't know. I'm just here. I'm just trying to do this. What that outwatcher who can help me see what I'm doing. You don't know what you're doing on stage, just as when you write something, you don't necessarily know what you've written. Sometimes on stage, you think you've done something and you haven't, or you think you haven't done something and it turns out you have. This is why an audience is a wonderful editor and a director is a physical dramaturg. So those two things are deeply related. Acting and writing at their best come from the same source. They both come from the same source within, but they are different crafts. And it is sometimes very challenging, just because I wrote something, to try to figure out how to stand and put my body into it and against it. So those are just interesting, different parts of the same craft.
And I am so glad you mentioned the director as a collaborator because we're all collaborators. And I always say that theater is a collaborative sport. So, what does collaboration look like in the time of COVID, and how has it changed how we're able to work with each other?
This is really a beautiful question. I am presenting a piece of mine called Just Give Me 1/2 Hour with My Mother. This piece is being presented on Zoom. It was supposed to open at Philadelphia's Kimmel Center for the Performing Arts in April, right when theaters shut down. So I'm doing it on Zoom. I've done it twice already. First as a benefit for the Northampton Center for the Arts, and now for Dixon Place in New York. And I have had a team of people out watching and helping me. I've got a student who is helping me with running the tech. I've got my director, my beloved friend Mary Milwee, and my two friends, Ginny Mayer and Mark Odette. They are married. They are advisors and outwatchers. And between all of us, we discuss, we think about a moment, we ask questions about the moment. It's been a beautiful collaboration, and I would not have even believed it. I would not have believed I was capable of dropping in a deep collaborative way on a computer, or performing my heart out in front of a computer. I've been surprised to notice that all those moments we have collaboratively examined and focused in rehearsal on computer are then moments that I'm working really hard to honor. That the getting ready to perform, the warm up, the imagination, the relaxation with energy, everything required to perform in front of 100 people is just as necessary for me to do a good job for the audience on Zoom. It's really been very interesting. I don't like computers. They make me very angry and I can't operate them. But that said, I have found that I'm just doing what I always did before a show. And this is a new show, and I'm learning how to do it.
I love that. I read that you have rituals prior to engaging in theater activities, and one of those rituals is reading from an old horoscope book.
Oh, yes. I read from the horoscope book before I begin any workshop or teaching exercise where I'm facilitating acting, playwriting, any of that. I read from this horoscope book that I got right before the first university teaching I ever got. And I read it to my students. That's one of the first things I do. And it says something like, people born between, it's very specific. It's not like, oh, just a general, oh, Virgos will meet a meet a new lover and find a good workout or something, like lose weight or something. No, it's very specific. It says people who come into the world, I don't have it in front of me, between 7:38 September 7th and 6:45 a.m. September 8th are quick-witted, clever individuals. Their musical and artistic talent will be used to teach and inspire others. Their students, in turn, may gain far greater fame, but will credit these individuals for the important role they played as teacher and guide. And I slam down the book and I say, please do not forget that I read this to you. If some old Jewish lady comes to your trailer when you're a movie star, you tell them to let me in. Do you understand? That's what happens at the beginning of class.
So, are there any rituals that you have before you go on to perform?
Oh, yeah. Well, there's a prayer I say that was taught to me by this crazy man who thought he was Jesus Christ. I mean, that was not a metaphor for him. That's what he thought. And he prayed this prayer, Almighty God, may our efforts amuse you enough. That's the whole prayer. Now, I do have some version of that I murmur to myself. I run around the room. I lean into the wall and open up my chest. I have that, and I get very nervous. It's just awful. Once I'm working within a minute, I'm fine. It's the stuff before the nervousness is terrible, and it's no different. Just because it's just a computer, it's the same thing. Isn't that remarkable? I would not have known that.
That is kind of remarkable. You know, it's interesting because I've interviewed so many artists who have lamented that what is a performer or an artist without an audience? When you are performing virtually, is there is an audience there that you may or may not be able to see. So how does that feel different as a performer, or does it feel different?
Well, I feel them. It's just as much an act of imagination to feel the audience as it is to feel the other things. It's just an additional act of imagination and sensing. It's an additional and not a, I haven't found it burdensome. I'm telling jokes in this show. Just give me 1/2 hour with my mother. Literal jokes, because it's about how my mother was a good joke teller. And I studied some of the late night hosts who began working out of their basement or attic, like Stephen Colbert. These people tell jokes and they're used to hearing an audience response. And in the beginning, Colbert, he would wait too long, because he was used to ha ha ha, but none came. And so he had to work on the timing of that. And I watched him do that work. He doesn't wait overly long now. He gives you that moment to have the experience and he moves on. So I've been studying the late night hosts, figuring out how to deal with comedy in the absence of anybody laughing. And I think I've done some interesting work on that. I think it's okay. I enjoy the joke and I feel the audience's response. It's another act of imagination, and then I move on. Do I want to perform to a computer? No. I can't wait until we're back together again. The beauty of the body keeps the score. There's nothing so beautiful as the body on stage and the community of witnesses who who sit together to bear witness. There's just nothing that beautiful. I really don't want to spend my life performing to a computer. I really don't. And given the situation, it's just been interesting to note the similarities between prep and emotion before an audience and that before a computer, where the audience is part of my active imagination.
Mm, I love that. I don't think any performer has explained that to me as eloquently as you just did.
Are you a director?
No, I'm a journalist and a theater lover, just an engaged audience member.
Thank you. Thank you for what you do. It's so important.
As a writer, though, I'm pretty fascinated because I read somewhere that you told a group of students in a workshop once that there is no such thing as writer's block. In this time of COVID, however, when everything feels halted and stopped, Does this time of isolation and quarantine, does this hurt or hinder your creativity, or does it nurture your creativity?
Well, when I said there's no such thing as writer's block, I didn't mean that there's never a time when it's difficult to write. What I really meant was that when you can't write, it's a life issue, not a writer's issue. There's living block. There's not writer's block. I talk about how every night we go to sleep and we dream in rich semiotic images. Everybody does. Your mind just rearranges daily life to show its emotional or significant side. And that's what happens. And that's what writers do. And we do it every night. We can do it every day, except if there's something in life that's getting in the way. It's not the ability to write. It's living block, not writing block, is the point I make. And I'm not writing right now. It's language right now to me feels oily and like an unctuous and greasy thing to put over something so delicate it could crack. I don't feel like writing right now. But that's not because I have writer's block. It's because of the circumstances right now. It's my life. It's not my art. It's not. Would language be available to me? Sure. Do I feel like language is what I want or can to reach for right now? Not really. There's a big silence in me right now. I know I could have fooled you terribly by the way I've blabbed on during this interview, but truly, I don't feel like it right now. I'm having in this time of COVID, in this time of my father being so very old and sort of leaving us slowly, um, in this moment of isolation from my children. My daughter got married and I couldn't even go to the wedding. I had to watch it on computer. My beautiful daughter. In this moment, there's a lot of sorrow. There's a lot of beauty and joy, but there's a lot of sorrow and there's a lot of worry. And language just isn't the right application for me right now. So that's an example of living block, not writer's block, if that makes any sense.
And I think that's what so many artists are experiencing right now, that this real life has come barreling into all of our homes and has really taken over. In your bio, you wrote that theater is inclusive, meaning anybody can do it. And I wonder, this idea of virtual theater or virtual productions and live streams, is that making theater accessible to people who otherwise wouldn't be able to go to the theater? Do you think this kind of accessibility will stick around after COVID?
I wish it would. I doubt it, but I wish it would. It's really it's upsetting the way really important shows that end up on Broadway cost $380 to sit in there. It's just we need to open up the theater. It's a place of conversation. It is a small d democratic place, and uh, it's a place where humanity is elevated for our viewing, and we can think about who we are. I wish I thought that. I bet it'll just go right back to its expensive and exclusive self. Uh, would it were not so. Maybe we can take some lessons from this time, when people are actually able to see things they wouldn't be able to see. But it's also important to remember that they're not seeing them the way we would like them to be seen. And inclusive theater is something that always meant a lot to us in Split Bridges. We worked in cheap places. You could just get in somehow. We worked in basements and church basements and people's houses. It began as a theater of inclusion and remains one. Um, so I appreciate that question more than I can tell you.
What do you hope people will get out of seeing this collection of plays? Your play kicked things off and set the tone to this whole 19th Amendment project. What do you hope people will get out of the series?
Well, I think it is a triumphant presentation of different voices in celebration of the same thing. I hope people will take a sense of how many different voices we are, all asserting ourselves in the direction of justice. I think there are so many different ways into a conversation about one thing that is of critical importance. And I really appreciate the diversity of voices, the different styles of writing, the different ways into the subject that people are taking. When the 19th Amendment was ratified, it did not include women of color. Women of color were disenfranchised from this right, even though they fought to get it. I appreciate the diversity of voices, and I think the whole series is a triumph. It is a triumphant constellation of voices, all reflecting on the same critical moment in history and the complexities of it and the ultimate triumph of it.
Deb Margolin's play, Inalienable Rights, is a co production of Burning Coal Theater, the League of Women Voters, and Raleigh Little Theater, and it is available to view virtually now through the end of September. Margolin's play, Just Give Me 1/2 Hour with My Mother, opens virtually August 29th. I'll put additional information for both productions in the episode notes. If you like what you've heard today, please consider subscribing to this podcast, become a patron of the show, follow us on social media at RDUOnStage, or visit us online at www.rduonstage.com. Until next time, I'll see you at the theater.